I was running 15 minutes late to pick up Emma and Jake from school when I realized I'd forgotten their therapy appointment consent forms in Marcus's car. We'd been divorced for 8 months, but co-parenting meant these awkward exchanges still happened. I called his office, but his assistant said he was at a counseling session and couldn't be disturbed. She gave me the address. Willow Creek Counseling Center on Maple Street. I figured I'd wait in the parking lot until he came out. The building was one of those modern glass structures that tried too hard to look welcoming. I parked next to Marcus's silver BMW and checked my phone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The session was supposed to end at 3:30, giving me just enough time to grab the forms and race to school pickup. That's when I heard his voice carrying through the slightly open window of the ground floor office. Marcus always talked loud when he was emotional. "The hardest part about this whole divorce is not seeing my kids every day," he was saying, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine pain. "Emma's 8 now, and Jake just turned 6. They're at that age where they need their father, you know? But Sarah, she's made it impossible. She's completely alienated them from me." I froze. My hand was already on the car door handle, but something in his tone made me stop and listen. Through the window, I could see him sitting in a leather chair, tissues scattered on the small table beside him. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes sat across from him, nodding sympathetically. Dr. Rebecca Chen, according to the nameplate visible through the glass. "That must be incredibly painful," Dr. Chen said softly. "How long has it been since you've seen Emma and Jake?" Marcus rubbed his eyes dramatically. 3 months. 3 months since I've hugged my children. Sarah won't even let me call them. She says I'm a bad influence, that I'm unstable. But I've been working so hard to get my life together. I just want to be the father they deserve." The blood drained from my face. 3 months? I had dropped the kids off at his apartment just 4 days ago for their weekend visit. They'd built a blanket fort in his living room and called me to say goodnight, giggling about the pizza party they'd had. Emma had lost a tooth there last weekend, and Marcus had played Tooth Fairy, leaving her $2 and a note about how proud he was of her. "Have you considered legal action?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Parental alienation is a serious matter." "I've thought about it," Marcus sighed heavily, "but I don't want to traumatize the kids with a custody battle. Sarah's already told them I don't love them anymore. She's probably poisoned them against me completely by now. They probably wouldn't even want to see me if I tried." I sat there in my car, staring at the man I'd been married to for 10 years, watching him perform grief over losing children he'd just spent the weekend with. The same children who had texted him pictures of their Halloween costumes 2 weeks ago. The same children who called him every Tuesday and Thursday evening like clockwork, because that's what our custody agreement required. "It sounds like you're dealing with a very manipulative ex-wife," Dr. Chen said, her voice full of sympathy. "Some people use children as weapons in divorce. It's one of the most cruel forms of emotional abuse." Marcus nodded vigorously. "Exactly. Sarah's never forgiven me for the divorce. She's making me pay by taking away the only thing that matters to me. My kids probably think I abandoned them. They probably cry themselves to sleep wondering why Daddy doesn't love them anymore." I felt sick. Not just because of the lies he was telling, but because of how easily they flowed from his mouth. How practiced they sounded. This wasn't the first time he'd told this story. The way he paused for effect. The way he touched his face at just the right moments. The way he made his voice crack with emotion. He'd rehearsed this. "I'm so sorry you're going through this," Dr. Chen said, reaching for her tissue box. "The bond between a father and his children is sacred. What Sarah is doing to you, and to Emma and Jake, is unconscionable." That's when something clicked. Marcus wasn't just lying to his therapist, he was building a case. A narrative. Poor devoted father torn away from his children by vindictive ex-wife. I'd heard whispers through mutual friends that he'd been dating someone new. Rachel something. A woman from his office who apparently had strong opinions about traditional family values and what children needed. I pulled out my phone and started recording through the window. The audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to hear Marcus describing in detail how I'd allegedly changed the locks, refused to let him see the kids, and even claimed I'd told them he was dangerous. All complete fiction delivered with Academy Award-worthy conviction. I've been keeping a journal, Marcus continued, documenting every attempt I've made to contact them. Every birthday card returned to sender. Every Christmas gift Sarah probably threw away without even showing them. I call their school sometimes, just to hear their voices during the announcements, because it's the only way I can feel connected to them. Dr. Chen was fully invested now, leaning forward with the kind of therapeutic intensity that suggested she was already mentally preparing a treatment plan for this tragic case of parental alienation. Marcus, I want you to know that your pain is valid, she said. The trauma of being separated from your children is real. We're going to work together to help you process this grief and maybe explore some legal options for reconnection. I looked at my watch. 3:25. I had exactly 10 minutes to get to school, pick up the kids, and somehow process what I'd just witnessed. But first, I had to know how deep this rabbit hole went. The worst part, Marcus was saying, is that I know Emma and Jake are suffering too. Sarah's probably filled their heads with lies about why I'm not there. She's probably convinced them that I chose to leave, that I don't love them. Can you imagine what that does to a child's psyche? My daughter probably thinks every man will abandon her. My son probably thinks he's not worth fighting for. I wanted to vomit. Emma and Jake were happy, well-adjusted kids who adored their father and looked forward to their time with him. They had no idea their existence in his life was being erased for therapeutic sympathy points. I think about them every single day, Marcus continued, his voice now a whisper. I drive by their school sometimes, hoping to catch a glimpse of them. I know it's pathetic, but I just want to make sure they're okay. I want to see Emma's smile, hear Jake's laugh. I want to tell them that Daddy loves them, that he's fighting to come back. Dr. Chen was taking notes furiously. These are natural responses to your trauma, Marcus. The fact that you're still trying to maintain connection, even from a distance, shows what a dedicated father you are. The session was winding down. I could see Marcus gathering his things, preparing to leave. Dr. Chen was scheduling their next appointment, something about exploring family therapy options and possibly bringing in a colleague who specialized in parental alienation cases. I just want my kids back, Marcus said as he stood up. I want to be the father they deserve. I want to take them to school, help with homework, tuck them in at night. I want to be present for their lives instead of being erased from them. I watched him walk toward the door, still playing his role perfectly. The heartbroken father, the victim of a cruel ex-wife, the man fighting against impossible odds to love his children. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I drove to Riverside Elementary faster than I'd ever driven before, my mind racing with possibilities. Emma and Jake were waiting in the after-school program, coloring pictures and arguing over whose turn it was to feed the class fish. They looked up when I rushed in, their faces lighting up with the kind of pure joy that made my chest ache. Mommy! Jake launched himself at me, his superhero backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Can we go to Daddy's tonight? He promised to make us pancakes for dinner. We're supposed to go Thursday, Emma reminded him, ever the responsible older sister. But Daddy said maybe we could have a sleepover if it's okay with Mommy. I looked at these two beautiful children, so innocent and trusting, so completely unaware that their father was somewhere across town, telling a licensed professional that they'd been stolen from him, that he hadn't seen them in months, that I'd poisoned them against him. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I think we should go visit Daddy right now. He's at an appointment, but I think he'd really like to see you both. The drive back to Willow Creek Counseling Center felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Emma and Jake chattered in the back seat, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. Emma was telling Jake about the book report she had to write about dolphins, while Jake was planning the elaborate Lego castle he wanted to build with Daddy over the weekend. Their voices were light and happy, full of the kind of casual affection that children have for parents they see regularly and love without question. I parked in the same spot I'd been in 40 minutes earlier, but everything felt different now. The building looked sharper, more imposing. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. Marcus's BMW was still there, which meant he was either still in session or had moved to Dr. Chen's office for extended conversation. "Why are we here, Mommy?" Emma asked, unbuckling her seatbelt and looking up at the glass building. "This doesn't look like Daddy's work." "Daddy's having a meeting here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I thought it would be nice to surprise him. Jake pressed his face against the window. "Can we go in? I want to show him my loose tooth. It's been wiggling all day." I looked at my children, these two perfect human beings, who had no idea they were about to become evidence in a case they didn't know existed. Emma, with her dark hair pulled back in the ponytail she'd insisted on doing herself that morning, one side slightly higher than the other. Jake with his gap-toothed grin and the small scar on his chin from when he'd fallen off his bike 3 months ago. An accident that had prompted frantic calls between Marcus and me as we figured out urgent care and insurance coverage. These were not children who had been kept from their father. These were children who called him when they found cool rocks at the park, who saved him half their Halloween candy, who made him Father's Day cards with their handprints and glitter that he'd probably never fully vacuum out of his carpet. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go surprise Daddy." We walked through the lobby, past the receptionist who smiled at the kids and commented on Jake's superhero shirt. Emma held my hand while Jake skipped ahead, his backpack bouncing with each step. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt eternal. But the kids were excited, whispering about whether Daddy would be surprised to see them. The hallway was quiet, except for the soft murmur of voices behind closed doors. I could hear Marcus's voice again, coming from the same office I'd been listening to earlier. Dr. Chen's door was slightly ajar, and I could see them both sitting in the same positions, tissues and notebooks scattered between them. "I just wish I could hear their voices," Marcus was saying. "I wish I could know that they're okay, that they're happy. I wish I could tell them that Daddy thinks about them every single day." Emma looked up at me, confused. "Why does Daddy sound sad?" I squeezed her hand. "Let's go find out." I knocked on the door frame, and both Marcus and Dr. Chen looked up. The expression on Marcus's face was something I'd never seen before. Pure terror, mixed with confusion, mixed with the kind of panic that comes from being caught in a lie so elaborate you've forgotten what the truth looks like. "Sarah?" he said, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" "Daddy!" Jake pushed past me into the room, launching himself at Marcus with the kind of enthusiasm that only 6-year-olds can muster. "Look, my tooth is super loose now. Want to see?" Marcus caught Jake automatically, his muscle memory of fatherhood kicking in even as his brain struggled to process what was happening. Emma followed more cautiously. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hanging back near my side but smiling at her father. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. "Mommy said you were having a meeting. Are we interrupting?" Dr. Chen was staring at the three of us like we'd materialized from another dimension. Her notebook was still open in her lap, filled with notes about parental alienation and therapeutic interventions for children who'd been turned against their father. "I'm sorry," I said, addressing Dr. Chen directly. "I hope we're not disrupting anything important. I'm Sarah Mitchell, Marcus's ex-wife. These are our children, Emma and Jake." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus was holding Jake, who was chattering about his loose tooth, and asking if they could go get ice cream after Daddy's meeting. Emma had moved closer to Marcus, showing him a drawing she'd made at school of their family, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "I thought you might like to meet them," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Since you were just telling Dr. Chen how much you missed them." Dr. Chen's eyes moved from me to Marcus to the children and back again. I could see her mentally reviewing everything Marcus had told her, trying to reconcile the narrative of absent, alienated children with the reality of two kids who were clearly comfortable with their father, who had recent artwork to show him, who were casually discussing weekend plans. "Daddy, can we still have pancakes for dinner Thursday?" Jake asked, still perched on Marcus's lap. "And can we watch that movie about the dogs?" Emma said it's not too scary. "I didn't say it wasn't scary," Emma protested. "I said it was only a little scary. There's a difference." Marcus looked like he was going to be sick, His face had gone pale, and I could see a thin line of sweat forming along his hairline. He was still holding Jake, but his arms seemed mechanical, like he was operating on autopilot. "Dr. Chen," I said, sitting down in the chair across from her, "I couldn't help but overhear part of your session earlier. I was in the parking lot waiting for Marcus, and I heard him talking about not seeing the kids. I thought there might be some confusion." Dr. Chen found her voice. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. Marcus has been telling me about his situation with his children, about the custody issues you've been having." "What custody issues?" Emma asked, looking between her parents with the kind of confusion that comes from hearing adult words that don't match your reality. "Daddy, why is the lady talking about custody? Are you getting a new dog?" I almost smiled despite everything. Emma had heard the word custody in relation to our neighbor's new puppy, and had decided it meant pet ownership. "Marcus," I said quietly, "would you like to explain to Dr. Chen when you last saw Emma and Jake?" The room felt like it was holding its breath. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Jake had gotten distracted by the stress ball on Dr. Chen's desk and was asking if he could play with it. Marcus started, then stopped. He looked at Dr. Chen, then at me, then at our children, who were treating this like any other day. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. "Just tell her the truth." "We were at Daddy's house on Saturday," Emma said helpfully. "We made a fort in the living room and ordered pizza. Daddy let us stay up late to watch cartoons. And Sunday morning we had waffles, and then Mommy came to pick us up." Dr. Chen's pen had stopped moving. She was staring at Marcus with the kind of professional confusion that suggested she was running through every therapeutic model she'd ever learned, trying to find one that explained what was happening. "4 days ago," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw them 4 days ago." "And before that?" I asked gently. "The weekend before," he admitted. "And the Thursday before that for dinner." Jake had started playing with the stress ball, squeezing it and watching it change shape. "Daddy, this is so cool. Can we get one of these? Oh, and I forgot to tell you. Mrs. Patterson said I'm getting really good at reading. Do you want to hear me read my book?" The innocence of his request, the casual way he assumed his father would want to hear him read, the complete absence of any confusion or pain about their relationship. It all hung in the air like evidence in a trial. "Marcus," Dr. Chen said carefully, "I think we need to talk about what's been happening in our sessions." "Can we talk outside?" I asked. "I'd like the kids to stay here for a minute." Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. He set Jake down gently and stood up, his movements stiff and mechanical. We stepped into the hallway, leaving Emma and Jake in the office with Dr. Chen, who was asking them about school and what they liked to do for fun. "Sarah, I can explain," Marcus started, but I held up my hand. "No," I said, "I don't want an explanation. I want to understand what you're trying to accomplish." He leaned against the wall, his eyes closed. "It's not what you think. What I think is that you've been lying to a licensed therapist about having access to your children. What I think is that you've been building a narrative about me being an alienating parent. What I think is that you've been setting up some kind of case that paints me as the villain in our divorce." Marcus opened his eyes. "Rachel thinks that you have too much influence over the kids. She thinks they spend too much time with you and not enough time understanding what a traditional family looks like." There it was. Rachel. The girlfriend I'd heard whispers about but had never met. The woman who apparently had opinions about how my children should be raised and what their relationship with their father should look like. "So you decided to lie to your therapist about our custody arrangement to what, exactly? Get ammunition for a custody battle? Get sympathy? Get validation that I'm a terrible mother?" "I never said you were a terrible mother," Marcus said weakly. "You told Dr. Chen that I'd alienated the children from you, that I'd changed the locks and refused to let you see them, that I'd told them you were dangerous, that they probably think you abandoned them." Marcus winced. "I was just trying to process my feelings about the divorce. By lying about our children's well-being? By creating a fictional narrative where they're suffering because of me? Through the office window, I could see Emma showing Dr. Chen her drawing while Jake demonstrated how loose his tooth was. They looked happy, secure, completely unaware that their father had been using their imaginary trauma as therapy material. "Does Rachel know the truth about our custody arrangement?" I asked. Marcus's silence was answer enough. "She thinks you're fighting for your kids, doesn't she? She thinks I'm keeping them from you. She thinks you're some kind of heroic father battling against an unreasonable ex-wife." "It's complicated," Marcus said. "No, it's not. It's actually very simple. You lied. You lied to your therapist, you lied to your girlfriend, and you were probably going to keep lying until you could figure out how to make your fiction become reality." We could hear Jake's laughter from inside the office. He was telling Dr. Chen about his Lego collection, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement to share all the cool things he'd built. "Those are happy children, Marcus. Children who love their father and trust him, and look forward to seeing him. Children who have no idea that their existence in your life was being erased so you could play victim in therapy." Marcus looked like he was going to cry, but I wasn't sure if it was from shame or from being caught. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked at him. This man I'd been married to for 10 years. This man who was the father of my children. This man who had just spent an hour telling a mental health professional that his kids had been stolen from him, while those same kids were coloring pictures to show him later. "Now," I said, "you're going to go back in there and tell Dr. Chen the truth. All of it. And then you're going to figure out how to have an honest conversation with Rachel about what our actual custody arrangement looks like. And if I don't?" I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Then I'll be happy to have that conversation with Dr. Chen myself, and with Rachel, and with anyone else who's been hearing your version of our story." Marcus nodded, his shoulders sagging. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." "You meant for it to go exactly this far," I said. "You just didn't mean to get caught." We walked back into the office, where Emma and Jake were now both sitting on the floor, showing Dr. Chen their school folders and chattering about their upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. "Dr. Chen," I said, "I think Marcus has something he'd like to share with you about our custody arrangement." Marcus cleared his throat, but no words came out. Dr. Chen was looking between us with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces had suddenly changed shape. Emma had moved to sit closer to her father, leaning against his chair while she colored, completely unaware of the tension crackling through the room. "Take your time," Dr. Chen said gently, though I could see the professional concern building behind her eyes. "Marcus, would you like to clarify what's been happening with your custody arrangement?" Jake had abandoned the stress ball and was now exploring the small bookshelf in the corner of the office, running his finger along the spines and occasionally pulling one out to flip through the pages. His complete comfort in this space, his natural curiosity and confidence, painted a picture of a child who felt secure in the world, not a child who'd been traumatized by parental abandonment. "I see them," Marcus said finally, his voice barely audible. "I see them regularly." "How regularly?" Dr. Chen asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "Every other weekend, and one evening during the week for dinner. Sometimes more if there are school events, or if Sarah has work commitments." The words tumbled out like a confession. "We have a custody agreement. A formal one. Through the court." Dr. Chen set down her pen. "Marcus, that's very different from what you've been telling me in our sessions." Emma looked up from her coloring. "Daddy, why do you look sad? Are you sick?" Marcus reached down and smoothed her hair, a gesture so automatic and tender that it spoke to years of regular contact, of bedtime routines and scraped knee comfort, and all the small intimacies of active parenthood. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he said, though his voice cracked slightly. "Daddy's just talking to Dr. Chen about some grown-up things." "Are you talking about feelings?" Jake asked from across the room, still browsing the bookshelf. "Ms. Rodriguez at school says it's important to talk about feelings. She says feelings are like weather, and they change all the time." Dr. Chen smiled at Jake, but I could see her mind working, processing the disconnect between the children's ease and the story she'd been hearing for weeks. "That's very wise, Jake. Your teacher sounds smart." "She is," Emma agreed. She helped me when I was sad about my hamster dying. And she helped Daddy when he came to school for my presentation and got nervous talking to all the parents. The room went quiet. Doctor. Chen looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows. You attended Emma's school presentation? Last month, Emma said proudly. He came to see me talk about my science project. He was more nervous than me, but he stayed for the whole thing and took pictures. And then we got ice cream after because he said I did such a good job. I watched Dr. Chen process this information. A father who hadn't seen his children in months wouldn't be attending school presentations, wouldn't be nervous about talking to other parents, wouldn't have the kind of casual relationship with the child's teacher that Emma's comment suggested. Marcus, Dr. Chen said carefully, I think we need to have a conversation about what's been happening in our sessions. But first, perhaps it would be best if the children stepped outside for a few minutes. Can we go to the lobby? Emma asked. I saw vending machines down there. I looked at Marcus, then at Dr. Chen. There's a seating area by the elevators. They can wait there for a few minutes. I want to get Skittles, Jake announced, finally abandoning the bookshelf. Daddy, do you have quarters? Marcus pulled out his wallet automatically, the kind of practiced movement that spoke to countless similar requests. He handed Jake a $5 bill. Get something for your sister too, okay? And stay right by the elevators where Mommy can see you. We will, Emma promised, taking Jake's hand. Come on, let's go explore. As soon as the children left, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Dr. Chen closed her notebook and leaned forward, her professional demeanor becoming more serious. Marcus, I need you to help me understand what's been happening here. For the past 6 weeks, you've been telling me that you haven't seen Emma and Jake in months. You've described a situation where Sarah has completely cut off your access to your children. You've talked about parental alienation, about changing locks, about children who've been turned against you. Marcus slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. I know how it sounds. How it sounds is like you've been deliberately misleading me about your family situation. These children clearly have a close, comfortable relationship with you. They're talking about recent activities, school events, weekend plans. Emma mentioned you getting nervous at her presentation last month. Jake asked you for money for vending machines like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat quietly, letting Dr. Chen work through the implications of what she'd witnessed. This was her professional domain, and I wanted to see how she would handle discovering that her client had been fabricating his entire therapeutic narrative. Can you explain to me why you felt the need to create this fictional scenario? Dr. Chen continued. What were you hoping to accomplish by pretending you were estranged from your children? Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. It started small. I was frustrated about the divorce, about having to share custody, about feeling like Sarah got to be the primary parent while I was relegated to weekends and dinners. When I started seeing you, I was angry about the whole situation. So you decided to lie about it? Not at first. At first, I was just venting about feeling displaced, about missing the kids when they weren't with me. But then you started talking about how difficult divorce can be for fathers, about parental alienation, about mothers who use children as weapons. And I guess I started to feel like my actual situation wasn't dramatic enough to justify how angry I was. Dr. Chen's expression was unreadable, but I could sense her professional wheels turning. So you escalated your story to match your emotions? I suppose. Each week it got a little more elaborate. I told you Sarah was being difficult about schedules, then that she was being hostile, then that she was limiting my access. Before I knew it, I was describing a situation where I hadn't seen the kids at all. Marcus, do you understand how serious this is? I've been treating you for a condition that doesn't exist. I've been developing therapeutic strategies based on completely false information. I've been documenting a case of parental alienation that never happened. Through the glass wall, I could see Emma and Jake at the vending machines, carefully counting out coins and debating their snack choices. They looked exactly like what they were. Normal children whose biggest concern at the moment was whether to get chocolate or gummy candy. I know, Marcus said miserably. I kept meaning to tell you the truth, but it had gone on for so long that I didn't know how to walk it back. And your girlfriend? I asked quietly. Does Rachel know the truth about our custody arrangement? Marcus's silence was answer enough, but Dr. Chen looked between us with interest. There's someone else involved in this? Marcus has been dating a woman named Rachel, I explained. Based on what he told me in the hallway, it sounds like she has strong opinions about our custody arrangement and believes children should spend more time with their fathers. She thinks the current schedule is unfair, Marcus admitted. She thinks Emma and Jake spend too much time with Sarah and not enough time learning about traditional family structures. She's been encouraging me to fight for more custody. Dr. Chen set down her pen entirely. So you've been using our therapy sessions to build a case that Sarah is an unfit mother who's alienating your children from you? Not exactly, but... Marcus trailed off, realizing how his explanation sounded. Marcus, that's exactly what you've been doing. You've been creating a documented pattern of alleged parental alienation. You've been establishing a therapeutic record that could potentially be used in a custody battle to paint Sarah as psychologically harmful to your children. The implications of this hit me like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just been lying to his therapist for sympathy or validation. He'd been building evidence, creating a paper trail that could be weaponized against me in family court. Is that what this was? I asked, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. Were you planning to use Dr. Chen's notes against me in a custody modification hearing? Sarah, I never meant for it to go that far. But you didn't not mean for it to go that far either, did you? You kept the option open. You built the foundation. Dr. Chen was looking at Marcus with the kind of professional disappointment that suggested this conversation was going to have consequences beyond our family drama. Marcus, I need to be very clear about something. The therapeutic relationship depends on honesty. When a client deliberately misleads their therapist, especially in a way that could impact legal proceedings involving children, that's not just unethical behavior. It's potentially fraudulent. Marcus paled. What does that mean? It means that I have to seriously reconsider how to handle the documentation from our sessions. It means that any notes I've taken based on your false statements could be considered tainted evidence if they were ever subpoenaed in a legal proceeding. It means that I have to question everything you've told me, not just about your custody situation, but about your mental health, your motivations, your therapeutic goals. The children were making their way back down the hallway, Emma carrying a bag of something colorful, while Jake clutched what looked like a candy bar. They were chattering to each other, pointing at pictures on the walls, completely oblivious to the fact that their father's elaborate deception was unraveling in real time. And there's another issue, Dr. Chen continued. If you've been sharing false information about Sarah with your girlfriend, if you've been using our therapeutic conversations to support a fictional narrative about parental alienation, then you've been engaging in a form of defamation. I never told Rachel anything specific from our sessions, Marcus protested weakly. But you told her that you were working through issues related to being cut off from your children. You let her believe that Sarah was preventing you from having a relationship with Emma and Jake. You allowed her to form opinions about your ex-wife based on information you knew was false. Emma knocked on the door frame. Can we come back in? Jake wants to show you the cool thing he got from the vending machine. Of course, Dr. Chen said, her professional composure returning as she shifted back into the presence of children. What did you find, Jake? Jake bounded into the room, holding up a small toy that had apparently come with his candy. Look, it's a tiny dinosaur. It changes colors when you touch it with warm hands. Watch. He pressed the small plastic figure between his palms, and we all watched as it shifted from blue to purple. The simple magic of it, the way his face lit up with wonder, the way he immediately wanted to share his discovery with everyone in the room. It was such a stark contrast to the adult deceptions and manipulations that had been dominating the conversation. That's amazing, Dr. Chen said, and I could hear genuine warmth in her voice. How does it work? I think it's the heat, Emma said, settling back into her chair. We learned about temperature in science class. Some materials change when they get hot or cold. Marcus was watching his children with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, certainly, but also something that looked like shame. These were good kids. Smart, curious, kind children who trusted the adults in their lives to tell them the truth and protect their interests. Dr. Chen, Marcus said suddenly, I need to tell you everything. The whole truth. The children looked up with interest, and I realized we needed to be careful about what was discussed in front of them. Not because they needed to be protected from the truth about their parents' relationship, but because they deserved to maintain their sense of security and trust. Maybe we should schedule another appointment, I suggested, just for the adults to finish this conversation. That's probably wise, Dr. Chen agreed. Marcus, I think we have a lot to work through, and it's going to take more than the few minutes we have left today. Can we go home now? Jake asked, apparently bored with the adult conversation. I want to show my dinosaur to my Legos. And I want to finish my homework, Emma added. I have math problems to do. And Daddy said he'd help me if I got stuck on the word problems. The casual way she mentioned Marcus helping with her homework was another small piece of evidence contradicting everything he'd told Dr. Chen. Estranged fathers don't help with math homework. Children who've been alienated from their parents don't casually expect academic support. We can go, I said, standing up and gathering the children's backpacks. Marcus, do you want to keep your Thursday dinner plans with them? The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning. This was a test, though I wasn't entirely sure who I was testing. Marcus, to see if he'd maintain the normal custody schedule after being exposed? Dr. Chen, to see how she'd react to hearing about our routine arrangements? The children, to see if they'd noticed anything wrong with their father's behavior? Of course, Marcus said quickly. Emma, I'll pick you both up at 6, okay? We can work on your math homework and then maybe make those tacos you like. Can we make the shells ourselves again? Jake asked excitedly. The ones where we press the tortillas in the muffin pan? Absolutely. Marcus smiled, and for a moment he looked like the father I'd married, the man who'd spent hours teaching Emma to ride a bike and who'd patiently helped Jake build elaborate pillow forts. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Chen pulled me aside quietly. Sarah, I want you to know that I take what happened here today very seriously. This situation raises significant ethical concerns, both therapeutically and potentially legally. I understand, I said. What happens next? I'll need to review all of my notes from Marcus's sessions and determine how to document this revelation appropriately. Depending on what else comes to light, there may be licensing board issues to consider. And if he had tried to use your notes in a custody proceeding. Dr. Chen's expression hardened. Then we would have been dealing with fraud, perjury, and the deliberate manipulation of the family court system. Thankfully, we're not there yet, but Sarah, if you have any concerns about Marcus attempting to modify your custody arrangement based on false claims, I strongly encourage you to document today's events thoroughly. I nodded, already mentally composing the detailed account I'd be writing as soon as I got home. Dr. Chen, can I ask you something? In your professional opinion, do you think Marcus was planning to use your sessions as evidence against me? She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think Marcus created a situation where that option was available to him, whether or not he consciously intended to use it. The pattern of escalating false claims, the detailed nature of his fictional narrative, the way he consistently portrayed you as the problem. It's the kind of documentation that could absolutely be weaponized in a legal proceeding. Mommy, are you coming? Emma called from the hallway where she and Jake were waiting by the elevators. I'll be right there, I called back, then turned to Dr. Chen one more time. Thank you for handling this professionally. I know it must be difficult to discover that a client has been lying. It's part of the job, unfortunately, she said sadly. But I have to admit, I've never had someone bring their children to disprove their own therapeutic narrative. That was a first. As we rode the elevator down to the lobby, Emma looked up at me with curious eyes. Mommy, why was Daddy's meeting so serious? Usually when we see Daddy, everyone is happy. I considered how to answer this. The truth was complicated, but these children deserved honesty appropriate to their age and understanding. Sometimes grown-ups have to talk about difficult things, I said finally. Daddy was talking to Dr. Chen about feelings he's been having since our divorce. But seeing you two reminded him of what's really important. Which is what? Jake asked, pressing the elevator buttons even though we'd already selected our floor. That he loves you both very much, and that no matter what happens between Mommy and Daddy, that will never change. It was true, despite everything. Marcus did love his children. The problem was that somewhere along the way, he'd convinced himself that loving them gave him the right to manipulate the truth about our family situation. He'd forgotten that love without honesty isn't really love at all. It's possession dressed up in prettier clothes. The elevator doors opened, and we walked through the lobby toward the parking lot. Behind us, I could hear the soft ding of another elevator arriving, probably Marcus leaving his session early, his fictional therapeutic narrative completely demolished. In the car, as I buckled the kids into their seats, I felt the weight of what had just happened settling over me. This wasn't just about a lying ex-husband or a misled therapist. This was about the lengths people would go to rewrite history when reality didn't match their preferred version of events. Marcus had been building a case against me using professional therapeutic documentation. He'd been creating a paper trail that painted me as a vindictive ex-wife who was damaging our children's relationship with their father. If I hadn't accidentally overheard his session, if I hadn't decided to confront him immediately, how long would it have continued? How elaborate would the lies have become? Mommy, Emma said as we pulled out of the parking lot, can we stop at the library? I want to get some books about dolphins for my report. Of course, I said, grateful for the normalcy of her request. Jake, do you want to find some books too? Can I get books about dinosaurs that change colors? He asked, still fascinated by his vending machine toy. We can look, I promised, smiling at him in the rearview mirror. As we drove toward the library, I realized that while Marcus had been spinning fictional narratives about our family and therapy, our real life had been continuing along peacefully. Homework help, and taco dinners, and library visits, and math problems, and loose teeth. The ordinary, precious routine of co-parenting that he'd been erasing in service of some larger story he was telling himself about being wronged. The question now was what story Rachel had been told, and how deep this deception really went. Because if Marcus had been lying to his therapist about our custody arrangement, there was no reason to believe he'd been more honest with his girlfriend about our family dynamics. And if Rachel believed she was dating a man who was being kept from his children by a vindictive ex-wife, then this story was far from over. It was just getting started. The library was busy for a weekday afternoon, filled with after-school kids and their parents. Emma headed straight for the non-fiction section, determined to become an expert on dolphins, while Jake wandered more randomly through the children's area, pulling books off shelves based purely on their cover illustrations. I followed them at a distance, my mind still processing everything that had happened in Dr. Chen's office. The casual way Marcus had lied, the elaborate nature of his fictional narrative, the professional way Dr. Chen had handled the revelation, all of it felt surreal, like I'd accidentally walked into someone else's crisis. But it wasn't someone else's crisis. It was mine. And more importantly, it was my children's, even if they didn't know it yet. Emma found a thick book about marine mammals and brought it over to me, her face glowing with excitement. Look, Mommy. This one has a whole chapter just about dolphin communication. Did you know they have different whistles that are like names? I didn't know that, I said, genuinely interested, despite the chaos in my head. That's fascinating. I want to include it in my report. Mrs. Patterson said we could add extra facts if we found really interesting ones. Jake appeared with an armload of books about various topics: dinosaurs, space, trucks, and one about a cat who solved mysteries. Can I get all of these? He asked hopefully. Let's start with 3, I suggested. You can always come back for more. As the children made their final selections, I found myself thinking about documentation. Dr. Chen had mentioned the importance of documenting today's events, and I realized I needed to be much more systematic about tracking not just what had happened, but what might happen next. Marcus had been building a false narrative for weeks. The chances that it would simply disappear now that he'd been caught were slim. People who go to the trouble of creating elaborate lies usually have deeper motivations than just wanting sympathy from their therapist. At the checkout counter, while the librarian scanned our books, I made a mental list of what I needed to do. Document today's conversation. Contact my divorce attorney. Research parental alienation claims and how they're used in custody battles. Find out more about Rachel and what Marcus might have told her about our family situation. "Mommy, you look worried," Emma observed as we walked back to the car. "Are you thinking about grown-up things again?" "A little bit," I admitted, "but nothing for you to worry about." "Is it because Daddy seemed sad today?" she asked with the kind of perceptiveness that children sometimes demonstrate when adults think they're not paying attention. I considered my answer carefully. "Daddy is going through some things right now that are making him confused about some stuff. But that doesn't change anything about how much he loves you and Jake, or about our schedule, or about anything that's important to you." "Good," she said matter-of-factly. "Because I like our schedule. And I like that Daddy helps with my homework. And I like that you and Daddy don't fight anymore like you used to." Her comment stopped me in my tracks. Emma was 8 years old, but she'd been watching and listening and processing her parents' relationship with the kind of attention that children bring to anything that affects their security. "You're right," I said. "Mommy and Daddy don't fight anymore, and we're going to keep it that way." It was a promise I intended to keep, but as we drove home with our library books and our vending machine dinosaur and our ordinary afternoon routine, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was just beginning. It was just going to be fought with documentation and evidence and truth, instead of shouting and accusations and manipulation. Marcus had declared war on our family's reality, and he'd been winning it one therapy session at a time. But now that I knew what battlefield we were actually on, the terms of engagement were about to change dramatically. The real question was how far he was willing to go to maintain his fictional narrative, and how much damage he was willing to do to our children's stability in service of whatever story he was telling himself about being the victim in our divorce. I was about to find out. That evening, after dinner and homework and bedtime stories, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and began writing down everything I could remember about the day's events. Every word Marcus had said to Dr. Chen, every reaction the children had shown, every professional concern Dr. Chen had expressed. As I wrote, patterns began to emerge that I hadn't noticed in the moment. The way Marcus had automatically caught Jake when he launched himself into his arms. The way Emma had casually mentioned recent school events that Marcus had attended. The way both children had natural, comfortable interactions with their father that spoke to regular, ongoing contact. These weren't children who had been kept from their father. These weren't children who'd been told their father was dangerous or untrustworthy. These were children who saw their father regularly, who included him in their daily lives, who expected him to be available for homework help and weekend plans. The disconnect between Marcus's therapeutic narrative and the reality of our family life was so complete that it suggested something deeper than simple frustration or even strategic manipulation. It suggested that Marcus had convinced himself, at least partially, that his fictional version of events was true, which made him much more dangerous than a simple liar, because people who believe their own fabrications will go to extraordinary lengths to defend them. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus. Sarah, I know today was difficult. Can we talk tomorrow after I drop the kids off from school? I think we need to clear the air about some things. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. We can talk. But any conversation we have will be documented, and Dr. Chen will be made aware of anything that relates to your therapeutic narrative about our family. His response came quickly. That's fair. I understand why you don't trust me right now. Right now. As if this was a temporary situation rather than a fundamental revelation about his character and his willingness to weaponize our children's well-being for his own purposes. I set the phone aside and continued writing because I had a feeling that my yellow legal pad was about to become the most important document in my life. Outside, it was starting to rain, the kind of gentle autumn precipitation that makes everything look soft and peaceful. Inside, my children were sleeping safely in their beds, completely unaware that their father had spent weeks telling a mental health professional that they'd been stolen from him. Tomorrow, I would start building my own case. Not a fictional one designed to garner sympathy or manipulate the system, but a factual one designed to protect my children from becoming pawns in their father's elaborate self-deception. Because if Marcus was willing to lie to his therapist about something as fundamental as his relationship with his children, there was no telling what other lies he might be willing to tell, or to whom, or for what purpose. The war for our family's truth had begun, and I intended to win it. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of crisp November air that made everything feel sharp and clear. Marcus was scheduled to pick up Emma and Jake at 6 for their weekly dinner, and I found myself watching the clock with a mixture of anticipation and dread. This would be our first interaction since the therapy office revelation, and I had no idea what version of Marcus would show up at my door. The children were ready early, as they always were for daddy time. Emma had finished her homework and packed her backpack with the dolphin book from the library, excited to share her research findings. Jake had carefully placed his color-changing dinosaur in his pocket, along with 3 small Lego figures he wanted to show Marcus. Their enthusiasm was genuine and uncomplicated, a stark reminder of what was really at stake in this unfolding drama. At exactly 6 o'clock, Marcus's BMW pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, I watched him sit in the car for almost a full minute before getting out, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he was preparing for something difficult. When he finally approached the door, his expression was careful and controlled, the face of someone who'd spent time rehearsing what they were going to say. "Daddy!" Jake yanked open the front door before Marcus could knock, launching into immediate chatter about his school day and the art project he'd started in class. Marcus caught him in a hug that looked automatic but felt stiff, like he was going through the motions of fatherhood while his mind was elsewhere. Emma appeared beside her brother, more reserved but equally happy to see Marcus. "Hi, Daddy. I found 3 more facts about dolphins for my report. Do you want to hear them during dinner?" "Of course I do," Marcus said, and his smile looked genuine for the first time since he'd arrived. "I can't wait to hear what you've learned." I stepped into the doorway, car keys and children's overnight bags in hand. "They're all set. Emma has her homework folder in case she needs help with anything, and Jake's bedtime storybook is in his bag." "Thanks," Marcus said, taking the bags without quite meeting my eyes. "Sarah, about tomorrow, are you still willing to talk?" "After you drop them off at school," I confirmed. "Corner Cafe at 9? I'll be there." The children hugged me goodbye with their usual mixture of excitement about daddy time and casual confidence that I'd be there when they got back. As I watched Marcus's car disappear around the corner, I felt the familiar pang that came with sharing custody, the simultaneous relief of having a few hours to myself, and the low-level anxiety of having my children somewhere I couldn't immediately reach them. But tonight felt different. Tonight I couldn't shake the image of Marcus sitting in Dr. Chen's office, describing in heartbreaking detail how much he missed children he'd seen 4 days earlier. The ease with which he'd fabricated that emotional narrative, the conviction in his voice as he painted me as the villain, in a custody drama that existed only in his imagination, it suggested a capacity for deception that went far beyond ordinary relationship dishonesty. I spent the evening doing what I'd been doing for the past 2 days, documenting everything. I'd started a file on my computer labeled Custody Documentation, and had been meticulously recording not just Tuesday's therapy session discovery, but months of previous interactions that I was now viewing through a different lens. Text messages where Marcus had seemed oddly formal about pickup times. Conversations where he'd probed for information about my work schedule or social plans. Moments when he'd asked leading questions about the children's feelings regarding our divorce or their living arrangements. What I'd originally interpreted as normal co-parenting communication now felt like intelligence gathering. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. "Marcus?" "Hi," I answered cautiously. "The kids are asleep," he said without preamble. "Sarah, I need you to know that what happened on Tuesday, it's not what you think." "What do I think?" "You think I was building a case against you. You think I was planning to use Dr. Chen's notes to try to get custody changed." I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the dark street. "Were you?" The pause was long enough to be an answer by itself. "Not exactly." "Marcus, that's not a denial." "It's complicated," he said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "Rachel has been asking questions about why the kids spend more time with you than with me. She's been researching custody laws, talking about father's rights, suggesting that maybe I was too accommodating during the divorce negotiations. So you decided to rewrite history to make her feel better about our arrangement? I didn't set out to lie to Dr. Chen. It started with me venting about feeling like a part-time parent, about missing the kids during the week, about wishing I had more time with them. When she started talking about parental alienation cases she'd seen, about mothers who manipulate custody situations, it felt validating to have someone understand my frustration. I set down my coffee mug harder than necessary. Our custody arrangement isn't the result of manipulation, Marcus. It's the result of negotiation. You agreed to it. You signed off on it. You've been living with it successfully for 8 months. I know that, but Rachel doesn't see it that way. She thinks you took advantage of my desire to avoid conflict, that I gave up rights I should have fought for. And instead of having an honest conversation with your girlfriend about the reality of our co-parenting relationship, you decided to create a fictional narrative where I'm the villain and you're the victim? It wasn't that calculated, Marcus protested. Each week, Dr. Chen would ask how things were going, and I'd focus on the negative feelings. The missing them, the wishing I had more time, the frustration with having to coordinate schedules. She'd respond with sympathy and validation, and gradually the story became more about you being difficult than about me learning to adjust to shared custody. Until you were telling her that you hadn't seen the children in months. I never meant for it to go that far. I walked to my living room and sat down on the couch, pulling a throw pillow into my lap. Marcus, do you understand what you were doing? You were creating professional documentation that portrayed me as someone who was psychologically damaging our children. You were building a case that could have been used to argue that Emma and Jake's best interest required removing them from my primary care. Sarah, I would never try to take the kids away from you. But you were creating the paperwork that would make it possible. Another long pause. I suppose, in the back of my mind, I thought it might be useful to have someone validate my concerns about the custody arrangement, but I never had concrete plans to use it against you. You never had concrete plans not to use it either. The honesty of that statement hung between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. Marcus had been keeping his options open, building ammunition he might or might not decide to use, depending on how things developed with Rachel, with our co-parenting relationship, with his own evolving sense of what he deserved as a father. What does Rachel think about all this? I asked. She doesn't know about Tuesday yet, but she knows you've been in therapy talking about custody issues? Yes, she's been very supportive. She thinks it's healthy that I'm processing my feelings about the divorce and advocating for my relationship with the kids. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the situation. Marcus, she thinks you're advocating for a relationship that you already have. She thinks you're fighting for access to children you see regularly. She thinks I'm some kind of monster who's keeping you from being a father. I've never called you a monster. You don't have to call me anything. You just have to let her draw her own conclusions from the partial information you've been giving her. Which is exactly what you've been doing. Through the phone, I could hear Marcus moving around, the soft sounds of someone pacing or adjusting furniture. Sarah, I know I've messed this up. I know the therapy thing got out of hand. But my feelings about wanting more time with the kids, those are real. Then you should have talked to me about modifying our schedule. You should have had an honest conversation about what wasn't working, instead of creating a fictional crisis to justify your dissatisfaction. Would you have been open to changing things? The question caught me off guard because it was the first genuine, non-defensive thing he'd said since Tuesday. I don't know. Maybe. Probably. It would have depended on what you were asking for and how it would impact the kids' stability. But Marcus, we never had that conversation because you chose to handle your feelings about custody through lies and manipulation instead of direct communication. I know, and I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you sorry you got caught? Both, he said quietly. I'm sorry I got caught, and I'm ashamed that there was something to catch me doing. It was the first completely honest thing he'd said to me in months, maybe years. The admission that he was sorry for the deception itself, not just for the consequences of being discovered. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. I need to figure out how to tell Rachel the truth. I need to figure out how to fix things with Dr. Chen. And I need to figure out how to make sure Emma and Jake never find out that their father spent weeks pretending they'd been stolen from him. The kids are the priority here, Marcus. They trust both of us to protect their sense of security and stability. They shouldn't have to pay the price for your therapy fiction or your relationship drama. I agree. Completely. Sarah, can I ask you something? What? Are you going to try to use this against me? Are you going to try to change our custody arrangement because of what I did? I considered the question seriously. The thought had crossed my mind. Marcus had demonstrated a willingness to fabricate elaborate lies about our family situation for his own benefit. He'd shown that he was prepared to weaponize professional mental health services against me. He'd proven that his relationship with truth was flexible when it served his purposes. Right now, I'm focused on protecting myself and the kids from any fallout from your deception, I said finally. If you can rebuild trust, if you can prove that this was an aberration rather than a pattern, if you can demonstrate that you're committed to honest co-parenting going forward, then I don't see any reason to change our arrangement. And if I can't, then we'll revisit the situation. That's fair, Marcus said, though he didn't sound happy about it. Marcus, I have one more question for you. Okay. How long have you been lying to Rachel about our custody situation? Since the beginning. Since we started dating. She asked about the divorce, about how things worked with the kids, and I told her that I'd been too generous in the settlement, that I'd given you too much custody because I wanted to avoid conflict. So she's been operating under false assumptions about our family for months. Yes. And she's been giving you advice and support based on those false assumptions. Yes. Which means that everything she thinks she knows about me, about our relationship, about the children's living situation, is based on lies you've told her. I guess so. I felt a headache building behind my eyes. This wasn't just about Marcus's therapy sessions anymore. This was about a months-long campaign of misrepresentation that had shaped another person's entire understanding of our family dynamics. Rachel thinks she's dating a man who was screwed over in his divorce and is fighting to maintain a relationship with children who've been turned against him, I said. Probably. Which means she sees me as the enemy in your relationship. She sees me as someone who's standing between you and your children. Someone who's damaging Emma and Jake by keeping them from their father. Sarah, Rachel doesn't even know you. Exactly. She doesn't know me, but she has very strong opinions about me, based on the fictional version of our story that you've been telling her. And those opinions have been influencing her advice to you about how to handle our co-parenting relationship. The implications of this were staggering. Every suggestion Rachel had made about custody modifications, every piece of advice she'd given about father's rights, every supportive comment about Marcus's supposed struggle to maintain a relationship with his children. It had all been based on a completely fabricated version of reality. Marcus, when you tell Rachel the truth about our custody arrangement, about the fact that you see the kids regularly and have never been denied access, about the fact that I've never interfered with your relationship with them, she's going to realize that you've been lying to her for months about something fundamental to who you are as a person. I know. She's going to realize that she's been giving advice about a situation that doesn't exist. She's going to realize that she's been supporting you in a battle against an enemy you invented. I know. She's going to realize that if you were willing to lie to her about something this important, she has no way of knowing what else you've been lying about. Marcus was quiet for so long that I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, he said, I think Rachel and I are probably going to break up. Probably. And I think Dr. Chen is probably going to stop seeing me as a patient. Probably. And I think you're probably never going to trust me the same way again. Definitely. So what I'm hearing is that I destroyed my relationship with my girlfriend, my relationship with my therapist, and my relationship with my ex-wife, all so I could feel sorry for myself about a custody arrangement that was actually working fine. That's a pretty accurate summary. I'm an idiot. You're a person who made some very poor choices that had serious consequences for multiple relationships. Whether that makes you an idiot or just someone who prioritized your own emotional needs over honesty and integrity, I'll let you decide. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between us. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the November wind. Normal sounds from a normal evening in a normal neighborhood where normal people were probably having normal conversations about normal problems. Sarah, Marcus said finally, I want to fix this. I want to make it right. How? I don't know yet, but I want to try. Fixing it starts with telling the truth. All of it. To everyone who's been operating under false assumptions because of your lies. I know. And it means accepting the consequences of those lies, even if those consequences include losing relationships that were built on deception. I know. And it means proving, through consistent actions over time, that this was an aberration rather than a pattern. Because, Marcus, if I find out that you've been lying about other things, if I discover that this kind of manipulation is how you handle problems in general, then I will absolutely revisit our custody arrangement. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't just about you and me anymore. This is about Emma and Jake's sense of security. This is about their ability to trust that the adults in their lives are telling them the truth and acting in their best interests. You put all of that at risk so you could play victim in therapy and impress your girlfriend with how hard your life is. You're right, Marcus said, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely remorseful rather than just sorry for himself. You're absolutely right. I'll see you tomorrow morning, I said. And Marcus, I'm going to be recording our conversation. I figured you would be. Good. Because the time for taking your word for anything is over. From now on, everything gets documented. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet living room and tried to process what I'd learned. Marcus had been lying to his girlfriend about our custody arrangement for months, creating a fictional narrative where he was the wronged party and I was the vindictive ex-wife. He'd been using therapy sessions to validate and elaborate on that fiction, building professional documentation that could potentially be weaponized against me in family court. But perhaps most concerning was the ease with which he'd done all of this. The casual way he'd admitted to months of deception. The matter-of-fact tone when discussing how he'd misrepresented our family situation to multiple people over an extended period of time. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a single lie that had gotten out of hand. This was a sustained campaign of misrepresentation that suggested a fundamental dishonesty in how Marcus approached relationships when they didn't serve his preferred narrative about himself. I walked upstairs to check on the empty bedrooms where my children usually slept, a nightly habit that felt both comforting and strange when they were at their father's house. Emma's dolphin research was spread across her desk, colorful sticky notes marking important pages in her library books. Jake's Lego creations lined the windowsill, elaborate constructions that told stories only he fully understood. These children trusted both of their parents completely. They moved between our two homes with confidence and security, believing that the adults in their lives were honest, reliable, and committed to their well-being. The idea that their father had been using their relationship as fictional material for therapy sessions would be incomprehensible to them. I made a mental note to ask Dr. Chen about whether children should be informed when a parent has been misrepresenting their family situation in therapeutic settings. It felt like something that could impact their ability to trust, but I wasn't sure if knowledge of their father's deception would be more harmful than continued ignorance. My phone buzzed with a text message from my best friend Lisa, who had been following the drama with the kind of fascinated horror that people reserve for other people's relationship disasters. How did tonight's pickup go? Any weirdness? I typed back. Awkward but functional. We're meeting tomorrow to talk through everything. I'll call you after. Want me to come sit in the parking lot during your conversation? Moral support and witness? The offer was tempting, but I wanted this conversation to be just between Marcus and me. No distractions, no audience, no excuses for either of us to perform, rather than engage honestly with what had happened. Thanks, but I think this one needs to be private. I'll record it though. Good, document everything. This whole situation is insane. She was right. The situation was insane. What kind of person fabricates months of therapeutic narrative about being denied access to children they see regularly? What kind of person builds a relationship with someone new based on fundamental lies about their family situation? What kind of person creates professional documentation that could be used to hurt their co-parent while maintaining a friendly, cooperative facade in day-to-day interactions? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was the kind of person who sees relationships as strategic opportunities rather than genuine connections. The kind of person who views truth as optional when it doesn't serve their immediate emotional needs. The kind of person who prioritizes their own comfort over other people's well-being, even when those other people include their own children. I'd been married to Marcus for 10 years, but I was starting to wonder if I'd ever really known him at all. The man I'd divorced had been selfish and emotionally immature, but I'd believed he was fundamentally honest. The man who'd been sitting in Dr. Chen's office creating elaborate fictions about our family was someone else entirely. As I got ready for bed, I found myself thinking about Rachel, this woman I'd never met who had been unwittingly pulled into Marcus's web of deception. She'd been dating someone she thought was a devoted father, fighting for access to his children, offering support and advice for a situation that existed only in Marcus's imagination. Tomorrow, when Marcus told her the truth, she would have to confront the fact that her entire relationship was built on lies. She would have to reconsider every conversation they'd had about custody, every piece of advice she'd given, every assumption she'd made about his character and his commitment to his children. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered that her support and validation had encouraged Marcus to escalate his therapeutic fiction, and I found it harder to see her as purely innocent in all of this. People who give advice about situations they don't understand, who make judgments about people they've never met, who encourage others to see themselves as victims without hearing the other side of the story, they bear some responsibility for the damage that follows. Rachel might not have known she was operating on false information, but she'd chosen to form strong opinions anyway. She'd chosen to influence Marcus's thinking about our custody arrangement without ever seeking additional perspectives, or questioning whether his version of events was complete and accurate. In the morning, I would sit across from Marcus at Corner Cafe and listen to him explain how he planned to fix the mess he'd created. I would document everything he said, every promise he made, every excuse he offered. And then I would begin the process of rebuilding a co-parenting relationship with someone I now knew was capable of sustained, elaborate deception when it suited his purposes. The thought was exhausting, but the alternative, losing my children's sense of security and stability because their father couldn't handle the emotional reality of shared custody, was unacceptable. So I would document everything, trust nothing, and verify whatever I could. I would protect my children from the fallout of their father's poor choices, while maintaining their access to a relationship with him. And I would hope that Marcus was capable of the kind of fundamental change that would be required to rebuild any kind of trust between us. But I wouldn't count on it. Because the Marcus who could lie to his therapist for weeks about being denied access to children he saw regularly was not someone whose word I could ever take at face value again. The war for our family's truth was just beginning, and I was finally ready to fight it with the weapons Marcus had been using against me: careful documentation, strategic thinking, and an absolute commitment to protecting my children's well-being above all other considerations. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of weather that makes everything feel more serious and consequential. I arrived at Corner Cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the back corner, where our conversation would be relatively private but still visible to other patrons and the staff. I set my phone on the table in recording mode and ordered coffee while I waited. Marcus arrived exactly on time, looking like he'd slept poorly. He ordered coffee without his usual small talk with the barista, and sat down across from me with the careful movements of someone trying not to disturb a fragile situation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said. "Before we start," I said, gesturing to my phone, "I'm recording this conversation. Do you have any objection to that?" I expected you would. Good. I've also prepared a list of questions I need answered, and I'll be taking notes in addition to the recording. This isn't a casual conversation between co-parents anymore, Marcus. This is damage control. He nodded, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like he was trying to warm himself from the inside out. I understand. Let's start with Rachel. When are you planning to tell her the truth about our custody arrangement? This weekend. I'm seeing her tonight. And I'm going to explain everything. Everything? About the therapy sessions. About the lies I told regarding our custody situation. About the fact that I've been misrepresenting our co-parenting relationship since we started dating. And you understand that this conversation will likely end your relationship with her? Marcus's jaw tightened. Probably, yes. Are you prepared for the possibility that she'll be angry enough to contact me directly? To confront me about what she perceives as my role in your supposed custody struggles? The question clearly hadn't occurred to him. I don't think she'd do that. Marcus, you've been telling this woman for months that I'm a vindictive ex-wife who's keeping you from your children. You've painted me as someone who's psychologically damaging Emma and Jake, out of spite. When she finds out that none of that is true, she might want to verify your new story with me directly. I'll ask her not to contact you. That's not good enough. I need you to explicitly tell her that any contact with me would be inappropriate and potentially harmful to the children. I need you to make it clear that if she has questions about our family situation, she should direct them to you, not to me. I can do that. I made a note on my legal pad. Next question, Dr. Chen, have you scheduled a follow-up appointment with her? Monday afternoon. And you're planning to tell her the complete truth about everything you lied about? Yes. Including the fact that you've been building a false narrative that could potentially be used against me in a custody proceeding? Marcus winced. Yes. Are you prepared for the possibility that she'll recommend you to another therapist? Or that she'll document the situation in a way that reflects poorly on your credibility as a client? I've accepted that Dr. Chen probably won't continue seeing me, Marcus said quietly. And I understand that there may be professional consequences for lying to a therapist about something this significant. Good. Because there should be consequences. Your actions didn't just affect our family, Marcus. They affected Dr. Chen's ability to do her job effectively. She was developing treatment strategies based on completely false information. I took a sip of my coffee and consulted my notes. Now let's talk about our custody arrangement going forward. Do you still want to modify it? The question seemed to surprise him. Do you mean, am I still interested in having more time with the kids? I mean exactly what I asked. Separate from all the lies and manipulation, separate from Rachel's opinions and Dr. Chen's sympathy, do you genuinely feel that our current custody schedule isn't working for you or for Emma and Jake? Marcus considered this for a long moment. Honestly, the schedule itself works fine. The kids are happy, they're doing well in school, they have good relationships with both of us. What doesn't work is that I sometimes feel like a visitor in their lives, rather than a full partner in their upbringing. Can you be more specific about what that means? You make most of the day-to-day decisions about their lives. You're the one who gets the calls from school, who manages their medical appointments, who handles their social schedules. I feel like I'm informed about their lives rather than involved in shaping them. It was the most honest thing Marcus had said about our co-parenting arrangement since our divorce, and I found myself actually considering his perspective seriously for the first time in months. Those responsibilities fell to me because I'm the primary residential parent, I said. But you're right that we could probably do a better job of sharing decision-making and communication about the kids' day-to-day lives. Really? Marcus, if you had come to me 6 months ago and said what you just said, we could have had a productive conversation about adjusting how we handle co-parenting responsibilities. Instead, you created a fictional crisis and used it to build sympathy from your therapist and your girlfriend. I know. I realize now how badly I handled my feelings about the situation. Do you? Because I'm not convinced you understand the scope of what you've done here. You didn't just handle your feelings badly. You created a false narrative that painted me as an abusive parent and used professional therapeutic services to validate that narrative. Marcus set down his coffee mug and looked directly at me for the first time since he'd arrived. Sarah, I know you think I was deliberately building a case against you, but that honestly wasn't my conscious intention. What was your conscious intention? I wanted someone to understand how difficult the transition to shared custody has been for me. I wanted validation that my feelings of loss and displacement were legitimate. I wanted support for the idea that fathers deserve equal partnership in their children's lives. None of those things required lying about our actual custody arrangement. You're right. But when Dr. Chen started talking about parental alienation, when she started describing cases where mothers had systematically undermined fathers' relationships with their children, it felt like she understood something about my experience that no one else had acknowledged. Except that wasn't your experience. No, but it felt like it could have been. It felt like if you had been a different person, If our divorce had been more acrimonious, if you had wanted to hurt me through the kids, that's what our situation might have looked like. I stared at him across the table, trying to process what he'd just said. Marcus, you created a therapeutic narrative based on a hypothetical version of our divorce? You lied to Dr. Chen about what might have happened if I had been a different person? When you put it like that, it sounds insane. That's because it is insane. You sought professional help for a fictional problem based on a situation that doesn't exist with a person I'm not. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. I think I convinced myself that the emotional truth of feeling displaced as a father was more important than the factual truth of our actual custody arrangement. The emotional truth versus the factual truth? My feelings about shared custody are real, even if the specific circumstances I described to Dr. Chen weren't accurate. I felt a flash of anger so intense that I had to take a deep breath before responding. Marcus, there is no such thing as emotional truth that justifies factual lies when those lies have the potential to harm other people. Your feelings about custody may be real, but the story you told Dr. Chen wasn't about your feelings. It was about my actions. You accused me of specific behaviors that never happened. I know that now. Do you? Because what you just described to me sounds like someone who still thinks the problem was that you got carried away expressing legitimate concerns, rather than someone who deliberately fabricated a false narrative for personal benefit. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee like he might find answers there. Finally, he said, I think you're right. I think I'm still trying to minimize what I did, because acknowledging the full scope of it is too overwhelming. What would acknowledging the full scope look like? It would mean admitting that I was willing to damage your reputation and potentially your relationship with the kids in order to get sympathy and validation from people who didn't know the real situation. It would mean admitting that I was prepared to weaponize mental health services against you. It would mean admitting that I prioritized my own emotional comfort over your well-being and the children's security. Yes. It would mean admitting all of those things. And it would mean accepting that I'm capable of sustained, elaborate deception when I want something badly enough. Yes. Marcus looked up at me, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen before. Genuine fear. Not fear of consequences, but fear of self-knowledge. Sarah, if I'm capable of this, what else might I be capable of? It was a question that had been haunting me since Tuesday. And I was relieved to hear him ask it because it suggested he was finally beginning to grasp the gravity of what he'd done. I don't know, I said honestly. That's why everything gets documented from now on. That's why I can't take your word for anything anymore. That's why rebuilding trust between us is going to require consistent actions over time, not just apologies and promises. How long will it take? I have no idea. Maybe years. Maybe never. It depends entirely on whether you can prove that this was an aberration rather than a pattern. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling between us. Around us, the cafe was filling with its usual Friday morning crowd. People grabbing coffee before work, retirees reading newspapers, college students with laptops and textbooks, normal people living normal lives, unaware that at the corner table, two divorced parents were trying to figure out how to rebuild a co-parenting relationship after one of them had spent weeks creating elaborate lies about the other. I have one more question, I said finally. Okay. If I hadn't overheard your therapy session on Tuesday, how long would you have continued the deception? Marcus considered this seriously. I don't know. I kept telling myself I would clarify things with Dr. Chen eventually. But each week it became harder to walk back what I'd already said. And Rachel was so supportive of what she thought was my struggle to maintain a relationship with the kids that I didn't want to disappoint her by revealing that the struggle was fictional. So you might have continued indefinitely. Possibly. Probably. I was in too deep to see a way out that didn't involve admitting I'd been lying for months. Which means that if I hadn't happened to be in that parking lot at exactly the right time, you would have continued building a false case against me indefinitely, while accepting sympathy and support for problems that didn't exist. Yes, and I'm ashamed of that. Good, you should be ashamed, but shame isn't enough, Marcus. Shame doesn't protect Emma and Jake from the consequences of having a father who's willing to lie about fundamental aspects of their lives when it serves his purposes. What would be enough? I looked at him across the table, this man I'd loved and married and divorced. This man who was the father of my children. This man who had just revealed himself capable of deceptions I'd never imagined him entertaining. Therapy, I said. Real therapy, with a different therapist. Focused on understanding why you were willing to fabricate this elaborate narrative, instead of having honest conversations about your actual concerns. I can do that. Individual therapy for you, not couples therapy for us. I need you to figure out what's broken in your relationship with truth, before we can work on what's broken in our co-parenting relationship. Okay. And co-parenting counseling, eventually, when your individual therapist thinks you're ready for it. We need professional help, figuring out how to rebuild trust and improve communication. That makes sense. And complete transparency about your therapy sessions. I want to know who you're seeing, what you're working on, and how it's progressing. No more therapeutic secrets. Marcus nodded. Anything else? Yes. I want you to write a letter to Dr. Chen, formally acknowledging everything you lied about, and taking full responsibility for the deception. I want a copy of that letter for my records. I can do that. And I want you to think seriously about whether there are other areas of your life where you've been less than honest. Because, Marcus, if I discover additional deceptions, if I find out that this pattern extends to other relationships or situations, I will absolutely pursue a modification of our custody arrangement. The threat hung in the air between us, and I could see Marcus processing the implications. He'd spent weeks creating a fictional narrative about me being a vindictive ex-wife who would use the children as weapons. Now I was making it clear that if he continued to prove himself untrustworthy, I would become exactly what he'd falsely accused me of being, someone willing to limit his access to his children to protect their well-being. I understand, he said quietly. Do you? Because this isn't about punishment, Marcus. This is about protection. The weeks that followed our coffee shop conversation unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of accountability and reconstruction. Marcus kept every promise he'd made, but the process of rebuilding trust proved more complex and painful than either of us had anticipated. The letter he wrote to Dr. Chen was thorough and unflinching in its admission of deception, but reading it made me realize just how elaborate his fictional narrative had become. He described specific incidents that never happened, quoted conversations we'd never had, and painted a picture of our family that was so far from reality, it felt like reading about strangers. Dr. Chen responded to his letter with professional courtesy, but declined to continue their therapeutic relationship. She recommended 2 other therapists who specialized in helping clients understand patterns of deception and manipulation in relationships. Marcus chose Dr. Amanda Sterling, a no-nonsense psychologist who made it clear from their first session that rebuilding his relationship with honesty would require confronting some uncomfortable truths about his character and his approach to relationships. The conversation with Rachel, according to Marcus, went exactly as badly as I'd predicted. She'd been so invested in the narrative of him as a devoted father fighting against an unreasonable ex-wife that learning the truth felt like a complete betrayal of everything she thought she knew about him. She didn't just break up with him. She told him that dating someone capable of such sustained deception made her question her own judgment about people. The relationship ended with her blocking his number and requesting that he never contact her again. But it was the conversation with Emma and Jake that proved to be the most challenging aspect of the entire situation. 3 weeks after our cafe meeting, Dr. Sterling suggested that the children deserved age-appropriate honesty about what had happened, not because they needed to know the details of their father's therapeutic lies, but because children are remarkably perceptive about tension between their parents, and our careful politeness was probably more noticeable to them than we'd realized. We arranged for a family session with Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist who specialized in helping families navigate difficult conversations with young children. Emma and Jake sat between Marcus and me on the comfortable couch in her office, curious about why we'd all come to talk to someone together. Sometimes, Dr. Williams explained to them, grown-ups make mistakes that affect their families, and it's important to talk about those mistakes so everyone understands what happened and how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Emma, ever the perceptive older sister, looked directly at Marcus. Did you make a mistake, Daddy? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I watched Marcus struggle with how to answer honestly without overwhelming an 8-year-old with the complexity of his deception. Yes, he said finally. I made a mistake about how I talked to someone about our family. I said some things that weren't true, and that caused problems between Mommy and me. What kind of things? Jake asked with the innocent directness that 6-year-olds bring to complicated situations. Marcus looked at Dr. Williams, who nodded encouragingly. I told someone that I didn't get to see you very much, even though that wasn't true. I was feeling sad about some things, but instead of talking to Mommy about my feelings, I told stories that made it sound like she was being mean to me. Emma frowned. But Mommy's not mean to you. You see us all the time. We just had pancakes at your house last weekend. You're absolutely right, Marcus said. Mommy isn't mean to me, and I do see you all the time. I made a mistake by saying things that weren't true, instead of talking about my real feelings. Jake climbed onto Marcus's lap with the casual affection that suggested this revelation hadn't shaken his fundamental trust in his father. Are you going to keep making mistakes? I'm going to try very hard not to, Marcus said, hugging Jake close. I'm talking to a doctor like Dr. Williams to help me understand why I made this mistake and how to make better choices. Like when I talk to the school counselor when I get mad at recess? Emma asked. Exactly like that, Dr. Williams interjected. Sometimes even grown-ups need help understanding their feelings and making better choices. The session continued for another 30 minutes, with Dr. Williams helping the children process their parents' explanation and ask questions about what this meant for their daily lives. The answer, thankfully, was that it meant very little. They would continue spending time with both parents according to their established schedule. The main difference was that Marcus and I would be meeting regularly with Dr. Williams to work on communicating better with each other. As we left the appointment, Emma took my hand and looked up at me with serious eyes. Mommy, are you mad at Daddy? I considered my answer carefully. I was very upset when I found out that Daddy hadn't been telling the truth about our family. But I'm not mad anymore because he's working hard to fix his mistake and make sure it doesn't happen again. Good, she said matter-of-factly. I don't like it when grown-ups are mad at each other. Jake, who had been holding Marcus's hand, suddenly stopped walking. Daddy, can we still make tacos tonight? Of course we can, Marcus said, smiling. We always make tacos on Thursday nights. The casualness of the exchange, the way both children had absorbed this difficult information and immediately returned to their concerns about dinner plans and weekend activities, reminded me why protecting their sense of security had been worth all the careful conversations and professional interventions. Over the following months, our co-parenting relationship slowly evolved into something more honest and collaborative than it had been even before Marcus's deception. His individual therapy sessions with Dr. Sterling were helping him understand the insecurity and need for validation that had driven his elaborate lies. He was learning to identify when he felt the urge to embellish or manipulate situations for sympathy, and he was developing healthier ways to address his emotional needs. Our monthly sessions with Dr. Williams were teaching us both how to have direct conversations about co-parenting challenges without defensiveness or manipulation. When Marcus felt like he was being excluded from important decisions about the children's lives, he learned to express that concern directly rather than building resentment or creating fictional narratives about my behavior. When I felt like he was being unreliable or unclear about his commitments, I learned to address those issues immediately rather than documenting them for potential future use. The most significant change was in how we handled disagreements about the children's needs and schedules. Previously, we'd both tended to avoid conflict by agreeing to things we weren't entirely comfortable with, then harboring resentment about those compromises. Now we worked through disagreements with Dr. Williams's guidance, focusing on what was genuinely best for Emma and Jake rather than what felt fair to either of us as divorced parents. 6 months after the therapy session revelation, Marcus asked if we could modify our custody schedule slightly to give him one additional evening per week with the children. But this time, instead of creating a fictional crisis to justify his request, he explained honestly that his individual therapy was helping him realize how much he'd been missing of their daily lives, and he wanted to be more involved in homework help and bedtime routines. The request felt completely different from anything he'd asked for before. It wasn't coming from a place of competition or resentment or external pressure from a girlfriend who thought he deserved more time. It was coming from genuine recognition that he wanted to be a more present father, and that our current schedule didn't provide enough opportunities for the kind of casual, everyday parenting that builds strong relationships with children. We worked out a modified arrangement where Marcus would pick up the children from school one additional day per week and keep them until bedtime. It was a small change, but it gave him regular access to homework time, dinner conversations, and bedtime stories in a way that felt natural and beneficial for everyone involved. Emma and Jake adapted to the new schedule easily, and I found myself appreciating having one more evening per week to focus on work or personal time without feeling guilty about asking Marcus for additional help. The modification felt like genuine co-parenting rather than a custody battle, and it demonstrated that Marcus was capable of advocating for his needs as a father without resorting to deception or manipulation. The real test came almost a year later when Marcus started dating someone new. Her name was Jennifer, and she was a teacher at a different school in the district who had her own children from a previous marriage. When Marcus told me he wanted to introduce her to Emma and Jake, I felt my old instincts kick and the urge to investigate, to verify, to protect my children from any potential fallout from their father's romantic relationships. But instead of acting on those instincts, I asked Marcus directly about how he'd described our co-parenting relationship to Jennifer. Had he been honest about our custody arrangement? Did she understand that our divorce had been amicable and that we worked together effectively as co-parents? Was she prepared to support a blended family situation where the children's other parent was actively involved in their lives? Marcus answered every question without defensiveness, providing details about conversations he'd had with Jennifer about our family dynamics. He told her about his therapy sessions, about the mistakes he'd made in his previous relationship, and about the work he'd been doing to become a more honest and reliable co-parent. Jennifer had appreciated his honesty and had shared her own experiences with rebuilding trust after divorce. When I eventually met Jennifer at one of Jake's soccer games, she was warm and respectful, asking thoughtful questions about the children's interests and acknowledging the complexity of blended family dynamics without trying to insert herself into parental decisions. She clearly understood that her role was to support Marcus as a father, not to replace or compete with me as their mother. The contrast between Jennifer and Rachel was stark, and it made me realize how much Marcus had grown during his year of individual therapy. He was no longer seeking a partner who would validate his grievances against his ex-wife or support fictional narratives about his victimhood. He was building a relationship with someone who appreciated his honesty about his past mistakes and his commitment to being a better co-parent going forward. Emma and Jake liked Jennifer immediately, drawn to her easy laughter and her genuine interest in their hobbies and school projects. She didn't try to win them over with gifts or special privileges. She simply treated them with the kind of respect and attention that children crave from the adults in their lives. When they started occasionally staying at Marcus's house when Jennifer was there, they adapted naturally to the expanded family dynamic. 2 years after the therapy session incident, our family looked nothing like the fictional narrative Marcus had created in Dr. Chen's office. Emma and Jake were thriving academically and socially, comfortable moving between their two homes and secure in their relationships with both parents. Marcus was in a healthy relationship with someone who supported his growth as a person and as a father. I had rebuilt my ability to trust him as a co-parent, though I maintained my commitment to documenting important conversations and decisions. Most importantly, Marcus had developed the self-awareness and communication skills necessary to address problems directly, rather than through manipulation or deception. When he felt overwhelmed by the challenges of co-parenting, he talked to his therapist rather than creating fictional crises. When he had concerns about the children's well-being or our family dynamics, he brought them up in our monthly sessions with Dr. Williams rather than harboring resentment or building elaborate justifications for his feelings. The incident had fundamentally changed our family, but not in the ways Marcus had originally intended. Instead of creating sympathy for his supposed victimhood or building a case for modified custody arrangements, his deception had forced all of us to develop more honest, direct, and healthy ways of relating to each other. Dr. Sterling eventually told Marcus that she believed he'd developed sufficient insight and coping skills to transition from weekly therapy sessions to monthly check-ins, though she encouraged him to return to more frequent sessions if he ever felt tempted to handle relationship challenges through manipulation rather than honest communication. Marcus took her advice seriously, viewing his relationship with therapy as an ongoing investment in his personal growth rather than a temporary fix for a specific problem. Dr. Williams continued meeting with Marcus and me quarterly, not because we were having ongoing conflicts, but because we'd both come to value having a neutral professional space where we could address co-parenting challenges before they became larger problems. These sessions helped us navigate everything from the children's changing academic needs, to their evolving social schedules, to their questions about adult relationships and family dynamics. The documentation folder I'd started during the crisis had evolved into a more general family communication system, where both Marcus and I kept records of important decisions, conversations with teachers or medical professionals, and plans for holidays or special events. What had started as a protection mechanism had become a useful tool for staying organized and aligned as co-parents. Emma and Jake never fully understood the scope of what their father had done, but they grew up with a clear sense that honesty was valued in our family, and that problems were addressed through direct communication, rather than avoidance or manipulation. They watched their parents work through disagreements respectfully, and saw both of us seeking professional help when we needed guidance or support. When Emma turned 12 and started asking more sophisticated questions about divorce and adult relationships, I was able to tell her honestly that her father and I had learned to be better co-parents by working with counselors and therapists who helped us communicate more effectively. She seemed satisfied with this explanation and proud that her parents had been willing to work hard to maintain a positive family environment for her and her brother. The final chapter of the story came when Marcus and Jennifer got engaged, 3 years after the therapy session incident. This time, there was no elaborate party funded by someone else's credit, no fictional narrative about relationships that didn't exist, no manipulation of professional services for personal validation. Instead, Marcus called me before proposing to Jennifer to talk through how their engagement and eventual marriage might affect our co-parenting relationship and the children's living arrangements. He wanted to make sure that any changes to his household dynamics would be handled in a way that prioritized Emma and Jake's stability and comfort. The conversation was remarkable for its directness and mutual respect. Marcus acknowledged that his relationship with Jennifer would necessarily change some aspects of how our families interacted, but he was committed to ensuring that those changes enhanced, rather than disrupted, the children's sense of security. Jennifer had been part of these discussions from the beginning, and she was equally committed to supporting the co-parenting relationship that Marcus and I had worked so hard to rebuild. When Marcus proposed to Jennifer, Emma and Jake were part of the celebration, not as surprised observers, but as enthusiastic participants who had been included in conversations about the possibility of their father remarrying. The proposal happened at Jennifer's house during a family barbecue, with Emma and Jake helping to plan the surprise and celebrating excitedly when Jennifer said yes. There was no therapy session needed to process fictional grievances about the engagement. There was no deceptive narrative about ex-wives or custody battles or children being kept from their father. There was just a genuine celebration of two people who had found happiness together and were committed to building a blended family that honored all of the children's existing relationships. The contrast with Marcus's previous relationship was so complete that it felt like watching a different person navigate love and commitment. The Marcus who proposed to Jennifer was someone who had learned to build relationships on truth rather than manipulation, someone who valued honesty over validation, someone who understood that genuine connection required vulnerability rather than fictional victimhood. As I watched Emma and Jake celebrate their father's engagement with pure joy and excitement, I realized that the therapy session incident had ultimately given our family something precious: the opportunity to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty and direct communication. What had started as a devastating betrayal had become a catalyst for growth and healing that benefited everyone involved. Marcus's willingness to lie to his therapist about our family had revealed a fundamental problem in how he approached relationships and conflict. But his willingness to confront that problem, to seek professional help, to make sustained changes in his behavior, and to rebuild trust through consistent actions over time, had demonstrated that people can change when they're truly committed to growth. The war for our family's truth had been won not through legal battles or custody modifications, but through therapy sessions and honest conversations, and the patient work of rebuilding trust one interaction at a time. Emma and Jake had grown up watching their parents choose honesty over convenience, direct communication over manipulation, and their children's well-being over their own egos. They learned that mistakes, even serious ones, don't have to define relationships permanently if the people involved are willing to do the hard work of acknowledging their failures and making sustained changes. They learned that trust can be rebuilt, that families can heal, and that love expressed through honest actions is stronger than love expressed through convenient fictions. As Marcus and Jennifer began planning their wedding, with Emma and Jake excitedly discussing their roles in the ceremony, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey our family had taken. The therapy session incident had been one of the most difficult challenges we'd ever faced, but it had ultimately led us to a place of greater honesty, stronger communication, and deeper trust than we'd ever had before. The fictional narrative Marcus had created in Dr. Chen's office had described a family torn apart by custody battles and parental alienation. The real story was about a family that had learned to face their problems honestly, seek help when needed, and prioritize their children's well-being above all other considerations. Emma and Jake would grow up knowing that their parents had worked hard to create a stable, loving environment for them, that adults can make mistakes and learn from them, and that honesty and direct communication are the foundations of healthy relationships. They would understand that families come in many different forms, but that the best families are built on trust, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The man who had sat in Dr. Chen's office creating elaborate lies about being denied access to his children was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to be present, honest, and collaborative as a father and co-parent. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been genuine and lasting. Years later, when people asked me about co-parenting after divorce, I would tell them that the most important thing is establishing a foundation of honesty and direct communication, even when those conversations are difficult or uncomfortable. I would tell them that trust can be rebuilt, but only through consistent actions over time, and that seeking professional help isn't a sign of failure, but a sign of commitment to doing better. I would tell them that children are remarkably resilient when the adults in their lives are honest about problems and committed to finding solutions. And I would tell them that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become opportunities for growth and healing, if everyone involved is willing to do the hard work of confronting their mistakes and building something better from the wreckage. The therapy session incident had taught our family that truth is worth fighting for, that honesty is worth protecting, and that love without trust is just possession dressed up in prettier clothes. But it had also taught us that people can change, families can heal, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones about second chances and hard-won redemption. Marcus never spoke to Dr. Chen again after his apology letter, but he often credited her with inadvertently saving our family by being the kind of therapist who created a safe space for him to reveal his worst impulses. If she hadn't provided such a supportive environment for his fictional narrative, he might never have realized how far his relationship with truth had deteriorated. Emma and Jake grew up to be confident, honest, emotionally intelligent young people who understood that families require work, that relationships require honesty, and that the adults in their lives could be trusted to tell them the truth and protect their well-being, even when that required difficult conversations or professional help. And I learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in courtrooms or through legal documents, but in therapy offices and coffee shops and family meetings, where people choose to confront their failures and commit to doing better. The war for our family's truth had been won through the quiet, persistent work of rebuilding trust one honest conversation at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.